والسلام على عباده الذين اصطفى. أما بعد فإن أصدق الحديث كتاب الله وخير الهدي هدي محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم وشر الأمور محدثاتها وكل بدعة ضلالة. ثم أما بعد أيها الأحبة الكرام السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. Inshallah, today we'll talk about an-nafaqah, which is the expenditure or the financial obligation of the husband toward his wife and his family, which is called an-nafaqah. In Arabic it's called an-nafaqah. والأصل في ذلك قول الله تعالى وعلى المولود له رزقهن وكسوتهن بالمعروف لا تكلف نفس إلا وسعها. This ayah is the basic foundation for this issue of nafaqah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says it is incumbent upon the father or the husband in this case to cover the expenses or the financial expenses of his wife bil ma'ruf. Bil ma'ruf as customarily known. And also it was mentioned in many hadith, like hadith Jabir radiallahu ta'ala an, وَلَهُنَّ عَلَيْكُمْ رِزْقُهُنَّ بِالْمَعْرُوفِ. The same like in the ayah that the Prophet says, it is incumbent upon you husbands to cover the expenses or the needs and basic needs of your wives. And also the ijma' or the unanimous consensus of all the scholars that it is an obligation upon the husband to cover the nafaqah of his wife and his family. So inshallah I'm going to discuss nafaqah al-zawja, to cover the expenses of the wife, the children, and also the relatives. We're going to talk also about some related issues to the nafaqah, like for example, if the wife works or has a job, should she contribute in the expenses, covering the expenses. I'm going to talk also about the things that is not part of the nafaqah. Okay. So let's talk first about the nafaqah, covering the expenses of the wife and the children and the relatives. First of all, besides it's incumbent upon the husband to do that, it is a rewardable act. It is considered to be as an act of charity, like mentioned in hadith Abu Hurairah radiallahu ta'ala an, قال إنك مهما أنفقت من نفقة, whatever type of a nafaqah that you spend on your family, فإنك تؤجر, you will get a reward for that. حتى اللقمة تضعها ترفعها إلى في زوجتك أو امرأتك, even for like a piece of food that you put in your wife's mouth, so you will be rewarded for that. providing you know that we have the intention, because it was mentioned that any nafaqah that you spend on your family, تحتسبها, meaning that you do it for the sake of Allah, you will be rewarded for that. So we do shopping anyway, but if while you're doing shopping you have this intention in your heart, you will be rewarded for that time and that money you spent in your shopping. If you have that intention in your heart, you are doing that to fulfill the obligation mandated by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to cover and to take care of your family, you will be rewarded for that act. So what's considered to be nafaqah and how much we should spend on our wives and family? Nafaqah in general is to cover the basic needs of your family members, the basic needs of your wife. Mainly we're talking about the wife here, to cover the basic needs, which is housing, shelter, okay, food, clothing, medical needs, and also the things that the wife used for makeup and cosmetics and things like that. Okay. All those are considered to be part of the nafaqah. But how much should we spend? It depends on how much you make, how much the husbands make. And also, it depends on how much she needs. If she came from like a rich family and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala blessed you with money and you have a good income, of course then you have to spend, or to at least to put her in a status like what she got used to at her family's home before, becoming your wife. Okay, so if you can afford to put her in a very decent, you cannot put her in, a less level apartment. Okay, the same thing as for the other type of expenses. So it depends on those two things: how much you make, and also how much she needs. Okay, but basically it covers the shelter, the food, the medical needs, the cosmetics and things like that. Type, who is the most person deserve of your nafaqah? Of course, yourself comes first, then your wife. Because the wife is entitled to the nafaqah. And this is mandated by the contract. You don't do it voluntarily. It is mandated by the contract. Okay, this is why it is in the top priority, even before your children, even before your own parents. Okay, and one of the characteristics of the nafaqah on your wife, that even if she is rich, she does not have to contribute anything towards the expenses. It is the sole responsibility of the husband, even if she is rich. While your nafaqah, or covering the expenses of others, including your own children, is if they are in need and you have excess. So if you have a child who has money, for example, he got a bonus or anything, or a gift, then you are not required to cover his expenses from your own money. You can cover his expenses from the money that he has. And the same thing applies to the rest of your relatives, like your parents, your brothers, sisters, and the other relatives. Okay? But in the case of the wife, you are required to cover the expenses, her expenses, even if she is rich. Okay? Because this is a right mandated by the contract. Okay, but your covering the expenses of the rest of your family members is an act of ihsan and muwasa. Okay, so this is the difference between the two. So number one is the wife, then your children, then your parents, and of course the mother comes before the father. Then any other relative whom you are entitled to inherit. This is a very general principle. Because Allah says, وَعَلَى الْوَارِثِ مِثْلُ ذَلِكَ. After Allah mentioned the nafaqat in this ayah, He says, وَعَلَى الْوَارِثِ مِثْلُ ذَلِكَ. And anyone whom you are entitled to inherit, if he's in need and you have excess, you are responsible to cover his expenses. Okay? So I'll give you some examples. A brother. Now, if you have excess and he's in need, is it an obligation upon you to cover his expenses? A brother or a sister, is he included in the nafaqah? We just apply the principle. Any one of your family members, of your relatives, whom you are entitled to inherit, like at that time, say if that relative passed away, are you entitled to inherit him? If the answer is yes, then if he is poor and you are rich, you are required to cover his expenses. So are you required to pay the expenses of your brothers?
Yes.
All the time?
If you can.
No, I mean, يعني, or there are sometimes, yarhamukallah, when you are not responsible to cover their expenses. We apply the principle. Now, if you have boys and girls, if you have children, then, if he has children, then you are not entitled to inherit him. Then, if that is the case, you are not required to cover his expenses. It's not an obligation upon you. You do it voluntarily, or you can give him from your zakah. Okay? Because a brother that has children, especially boys and girls, then you are not entitled to inherit him. The same thing applies to sister, and the same thing applies to all your relatives. Okay, so to see whether he is entitled to your nafaqah or not, you have to ask yourself this question: if he passed away now, am I entitled to inherit him? If the answer is yes, and he's poor, then you are required to cover his expenses. After you cover yours, your wife's, your children, then if you have excess, then you need to cover the expenses of that poor relative. If he is poor, or if he is unable, he's disabled person, he cannot earn his living, okay? Or if he is poor, he cannot find a job, then it is a requirement upon you to cover his expenses. Now the question of if the wife works, if she has a job, does she have to contribute anything towards the nafaqah of the household? It depends. Okay. Now I'm going to cover, inshallah, different scenarios. Now, if the wife, at the contract, the time of the contract, or before that, made a condition or set a condition that she will keep her job or she will have a job, okay, and you did not mention any condition that she should contribute towards the household, then there is no obligation upon her to put anything towards the nafaqah of that house. Okay, this is the first scenario. Now, if she did not set such a condition, okay, but later on she expressed her intention to have a job. Now here it depends on you. You might say yes, or you might say no. And also you can say yes, you can have a job, and lay conditions that yes, no problem, you can work, but you have to contribute half of your income towards the household, or 1/4 or 1/3, whatever you agreed on. This is also acceptable. Okay, but to say yes or no, it is your absolute right. She does not have the right to have a job without your permission, unless if she stated a condition at the time of the contract that she will keep her job, for example. Okay, or she's going to have a job because she wants to cover, also the expenses of her relatives. Because covering the expenses and the nafaqah of her relatives is not your responsibility. It is not the responsibility of the husband to cover the nafaqah of his in-laws, unless if you want to do it, voluntarily, but it's not mandatory upon him. So if she wants, for example, to help her father or her mother or her brothers and sisters, and she wants to have a job, and you accepted that, there is no problem. You can give her a conditional or unconditional acceptance. Okay, but if he laid a condition, no problem, you can work, but you have to contribute. Why? Because you are responsible to cover the expenses, the nafaqah of your wife, because she has to stay home for you. So the time that she's going to spend working is your time. Okay? Unless if you voluntarily accepted that before marriage. But after marriage, she cannot have a job without the permission of the husband. And as I said, the permission could be conditional or unconditional. Some scholars, they said, if he did not mention any condition, he said, okay, no problem, go and work. But it is a well-known practice in that community that usually when women work, they help their husbands. They said they applied a principle that says al-ma'ruf urfan kal-mashruti shartan, that the thing that is well known in the community, it is enough as a condition, because it's well known that usually when wives work, they help their husbands. If that is a known custom in that community, some scholars, they said even if he did not mention a condition that you can work, but you have to do that, something like that, then if it is known that wives help their husband in that community, like being part of the rent, something like that, then it will be mandatory upon her to contribute. Okay? But it would be preferred, if he wants her to contribute, to state that in a very clear condition when he gave her the permission. This is regarding the issue of women or wives working, if they set the condition before the marriage or during the marriage. Wallahu ta'ala alam. Now, what is not considered part of the nafaqah? First of all, al-hajj. Is it mandatory upon a husband to take his wife to hajj? No, it's not mandatory, even if he's rich. And if he did not take her to hajj, even if he's rich, he's not committing a sin. Okay, and I keep mentioning this issue just I need our sisters to appreciate what their husbands are doing for them. And it is not an obligation upon the husband to take his wife to the Hajj. If he did it, he will do it voluntarily, but he will be rewarded for that, for example. And it is a big reward because he will receive an equivalent reward of her Hajj. But it's not an obligation. He will not be held accountable for not taking his wife to Hajj. Okay, and she will be exempted. If he refused, and she wasn't able to make Hajj because he refused to take her, she is exempted from Hajj and she will not be held accountable for not making Hajj. Okay, because Al-Hajj is with Al-Istita'a. If any person, any Muslim is unable to make Hajj, then he will be pardoned and he will not be held accountable for that. Okay. Also, paying her zakah. If she has jewelry, we said jewelry is a stronger opinion of the scholars that jewelry owned by women are subject to the zakah if they reach an amount of nisab, which is about 85 grams of gold. Okay, and they have it in her possession. She has it in her possession for a whole lunar year. Okay, so if she has jewelry like 100 grams of gold, she has to pay the zakah. She has to pay. It's the responsibility of her to pay the zakah every year from that jewelry. Either paying, like if it's 100 grams, just to pick up any item like an earring, something like that, which weighs of 2.5 grams, and give it as zakah, or she can give the price of 2.5 grams. But it is sole responsibility. And even if the husband wants to volunteer and pay the zakah on behalf of his wife, she must give him the permission. If he paid it without telling her, it's not considered to be zakah, because zakah is an act of worship and the intention is very important. She must have the intention. Okay, so she must permit him to pay the zakah. Okay, but it is her sole responsibility. If she does not have cash money, she can sell part of that gold to pay the zakah. Also, it is not obligatory upon the husband to pay off the debts of his wife. If his wife is indulged in debts, unless if she borrowed money to cover her basic needs. But if she borrowed money, for example, to purchase a computer or a car or something like that from her friend, it is not the responsibility of the husband to pay off that debt, unless if he wants to do it voluntarily. Okay, but he can pay his zakah towards payment of that debt. You cannot pay your zakah to cover the expenses of your wife because it's an obligation upon you. But since your wife's debt is not your responsibility, is not under your zakah, your nafaqah, then you can pay off her debt from your zakah. This is one of the situations where you can pay your zakah to your wife, if it is to pay off her debt. No. Yarhamukallah. So paying off the debts of one's wife are not the obligation upon the husband, and unless if you want to do it voluntarily, and of course he will be rewarded for that. In brief, those are some of the important issues related to the nafaqah or the financial obligation upon husbands towards their wives and towards their family members. As I said, the priority is for the nafaqah of the wife. Of course, the priority for your own nafaqah, then your wife, then after that your children, then your parents, mothers comes first, then after that any other relative that you are entitled to inherit him. Okay, providing that he is poor, or he is in need, or he is disabled or unable to earn his living, and you have excess. After you cover your own nafaqah and your wife's nafaqah, then you have excess, then you cover the nafaqah of the rest of your relatives. Wallahu ta'ala ajalla alam. Inshallah, today's lecture is brief, and inshallah, if you have any question, we can answer the questions inshallah later on. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdik, ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta, astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk, wa sallallahu wa sallim wa barik ala Muhammad.